the process of making the model is going to be akin to the process of the city evolving and growing across time, I think. But we're not going to, it's not going to be stinky. The model itself isn't going to be dressed in oils and drip and ooze across the floor. I think it's kind of, it's a snapshot and a representation of an idea, I think.
Maybe a little Bollywood incense out of the last remaining smokestack on the island would be good. I don't know. They're Euclidean and flat and kind of rough and don't have the surface area that natural landscapes have. And, that's actually pretty bad because, this kind of sterility is like easy for us to deal with, but it's not really good for the surface of the planet. And it has difficulties in that, like, grime does build up in areas and it's not recycled into living tissue, and you get these kinds of, noisome collections of litter that otherwise would have just been folded into.
But there's also like a whole discussion of cities now as being hotbeds of evolutionary change. There's certain animals that have adapted to be only able to survive in urban environments. There's this great image of a whole series of raccoons that have learnt the number 38 bus timetable in San Francisco, because the guy who drives the bus every night brings a tin of dog food to feed the raccoons, so they start to, it's almost like they're checking their watch, waiting for their bus to turn up, and they all gather around outside the door, right?
Feral foxes in the London Underground that ride the escalators.
But just with raccoons are things like, they take our trash and they kind of recycle it, and they shit it out and turn it back to soil. They're contemporary urban recyclers that we should be encouraging further into our cities. Well, the fabric that we make our clothes out of is breathable. The latest sports gear is designed to allow us to perspire in particular ways, but allow the skin to breathe and allow us to keep muscles warm. One can imagine that kind of technology extending into the spatial realm, but even more substantially, when you're talking about it at a different scale. So I think that all that stuff is completely doable, but I don't think efficiency is the end game. It's not about
and I don't think plausibility is the end game either.
Yeah.
I think if such a thing were to exist, you really wouldn't be likely to get really airtight kind of policing of a thing like that. What you get is some kind of like typical police gesture toward an impermeable membrane, and then a handy underclass where somebody was paying off whoever it was to like maintain this just in order. I mean, right now in Italy, we've had a big scandal of guys importing genetically modified soybeans into the non-genetically modified soybean chain. But obviously it's very profitable, very hard to detect. And somebody ratted them out because they were found with like 1,500 tons of the stuff ready to turn over. Just pitch it into it's like, here hippies, here's your pure soybeans, And it's like an ideological gesture which is very hard to enforce and practice, and so it ends up just kind of being ventilated.
But it's also, when we're talking about a city built on a biology, then bioregionalism and contamination and invasive species actually becomes part of a discussion of urban infrastructure. Like I'm thinking of the tourist strategy in the Galapagos Islands is one of water-based tourism. So you get onto the one island that they've kind of admitted is going to be screwed, and then you get on a boat, and then you float around, and you just peer out from the edge of the boat into these islands as strange kind of museums to a past ecosystem that's now too fragile to support itself. That still didn't even work. There's still invasive species running all across these islands. The native flowers in the Galapagos are only yellow or white. But now there's colours everywhere because people that lived on the main island wanted some color in their garden. So now, they brought in, red flowers and all these other sorts of things that then the seeds got in people's shoes, and then when they're on the boats and they jump off on land to take a piss or something, then that gets contaminated. Now these islands have strange sort of plants that they never should have had. Originally, before we had any idea about it, we introduced goats because we were going to feed on goats, and now the goats have eaten the total habitat. And now we fly around in helicopters with gunmen, with these kind of eco snipers peering out the side of helicopters with rifles shooting goats as a kind of a cleansing process to return the island to some strange idea of what it was. So I think that idea of bioregionalism in the protected enclave, or what is the role of, is it an endemic ecosystem just as much as it is an imaginary city that we're starting to explore here, then what the boundaries of that ecosystem are and how one protects it.
Well, I think what's going on there is like an attempt to engineer some new covenant with nature. This is, an act by somebody who's like some kind of social engineer and has like gone in and they're trying to like just write this stuff into the infrastructure of daily life in the city. So it's just sort of impossible for you to carry out these actions, and the things that would motivate you to live this previously destructive lifestyle have just been engineered away. In terms of like weird cities with sort of walls around them, that's actually a major trend. And you can go to any place in the U.S. now and find these gated communities that have all kinds of surveillance cameras and super extra triple RFID cards and, iris sensitometer, voice detecting Siri equipped whatever is not far away. And, there are plenty of areas where the wealthy live. They're basically closed to surveillance, and you're not going to know what's going on in there. Everybody may think that their lives are a porous, open secret on Facebook, but you don't know where the hell Zuckerberg is right now, and you're not going to be knowing anytime soon. I have seen a city that's a bit like this because I've been to Astana in Kazakhstan, which is this newly built Brasilia for the independent nation of Kazakhstan. It's like built with a lot of oil money, and it's like out in the middle of wherever. So I was chatting with the apparatchiks who were my hosts, and they're mostly young guys, and they're like, "It's great here." It's like, we're all young and we're like working for the government, and it's not like back home and like all the decisions are made by like corny tribal elders. Out here is like the sky's the limit. We can like start our own stuff, and all the buildings are new, and the wife really loves the plumbing, and it's sort of like great. And then you sort of wonder where this thing came from, and it's all like the brainchild of this amazing guy, Nazarbayev, who's their sort of Duce figure, who just conjured this thing out of the desert in kind of an autocratic gesture, and he's running what's basically, an oil petrocratic one-party state. So, as long as you're like keen on like being in this guy's pocket, it's great. But the videos that I was running here, which demonstrate the ability to like interact with computer systems just by touching surfaces, or even just drawing control devices on it, or even just waving your hand in midair, people don't read that as like a political implication, that it means that I can just sort of like wave you into jail, or maybe you can just vote, or register to vote by just holding up your hand. Because now the exact parameters of my hand, and that means I can leave my mark on the urban texture. I can just sort of like witness with my own body. So we were running a few riffs on that, but I really think that's a very rich area. I mean, talking about that now is like talking about the internet in the 1970s. And there's sort of a social metaphor of exclusion, because you have no doorknobs, you just have ID and passwords. So, I can walk through the door, but you can't walk through the door, and there's really no way for you to do that at all. Okay, that makes me royalty. I'm like system administrator, whereas you're just like the lowly user. But then when you also overlap that on like a regime of filtration systems, quarantine, sort of medical, diversive levels of medical treatment, it's sort of like takes on this kind of multi-dimensional form and really suggests a society that, where old boundaries have melted, but new boundaries have been installed that sort of cut power systems and social practice through a different set of ways. Whereas if you call it something like collective intelligence or social media, it's like, oh, we're all looking after each other, and, it's just fine and it's kind of great. But, in China they have these kind of emergent internet semi-institutions that are called like human flesh search engines, which are basically just democratic mobs of you know, anonymous style hackers who will like share videos of people committing various kinds of social awkwardness or transgression, and then just scold them in this sort of like merciless Chinese fashion. It's like, how dare you? You're not fit to live. You should really apologize. You know, and then they'll like call their employers and like cold call them at home and share data on how to just persecute people who've committed some kind of social transgression. And you know, that's social media with Chinese characteristics. It's very much the kind of neighborhood in the hutong dropping by to give you a good scolding about, you know, about your lack of social solidarity with the other people in the neighborhood. And you know, these things emerge from these structures, and they are power structures. And they don't necessarily lay power naked, but they do create new forms of power. And
I mean, I find it interesting that we started with a kind of a, you know, this provocation about the dematerialized city through these kind of technologies, the millimeter precision of motion tracking. You know, your provocation that you sent through earlier about what does the bathroom look like when there's no faucets, there's no door handles? What does the city look like when everything is allowed to disappear at the privilege of, you know, a gestured communication relationship to things, as opposed to the physicality of the mechanics of making stuff work? And then what does that leave space for? And I think what that left space for, in a way, was Rachel Armstrong's provocation about soil cities and biology. And all of a sudden, you know, these kind of technologies actually facilitate the city disappearing into landscape somehow. You know, and I think that's what we're left with, is this strange potential for an urbanism that's purely about a biology, that's facilitated through this virtual doppelganger of the scan which sits over the top of it. You know, and I think that kind of colliding of these two different worlds from both Bruce and Rachel was actually a really interesting part of the weekend.